My name is Michael Grauer. I'm the McCaslin Chair of Cowboy Culture, Curator of Cowboy Collections in Western Art, and I have the world's longest title. This is my first year to get to curate the Traditional Cowboy Arts Association annual exhibition and sale. I've been here 6 years, and it's my job to moderate and keep them in their lanes, but that's no fun, so I really don't want to do that. We're going to let them go where they take them. So I'm going to introduce these gentlemen. To my left, they're all esteemed artists and/or scholars and curators who are part of this initial panel about traditions and foundations. First up is Scott Hardy, right here, raise your hand. Scott Hardy's a fifth-generation stockman and Western silversmith for over 40 years. He was raised with the mantra, I'm not sure what a mantra is, but he can explain that. That actions mean more than words. He is Canadian, so we need to remember. Have him speak American while he's here. And he's collaborated, along with contributing silver for 61 saddles. He's created 112 personal objects and 125 other projects with the TCAA. I'm not allowed to read the whole thing, so I just got to tell you a little bit. He's also the reigning president, correct? Or chairperson?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, of the TCAA. So that's Scott Hardy. Ernie Marsh is all the way down at the other end. He lives in Lovell, Wyoming. He's been a professional bit and spur maker for 30 years. He cowboyed, as all of them did. They all cowboyed at one time or another. He was a famous rodeo star for a little while, at least in his own mind. And they currently live in Lovell, Wyoming, and he's a founding member of the TCAAs. And let's find Cary in here somewhere. I normally don't use notes, so this is confusing to me.
That's okay if you don't find one.
Cary Schwarz lives in Idaho. 27 years since he had his first conversation with Mike Beaver about a concept that would become the Traditional Cowboy Arts Association. So you can blame him. As the TCA celebrates its silver anniversary, He reflects on the remarkable things that have happened within the world of cowboy craftsmanship and artistry over those 2.5 decades. And he believes the best work is yet to come. And I'm here to tell you that as curator of this year's show, this is the best show I've seen since I've been here over these last 6 years. Every single one of these artists elevated their work, brought their A++ game in every single object in the exhibition. So make sure you're aware of that. So those are the three artists, and then second from your right is Don Reeves. For 38 years, he was curator, collection manager, registrar, general man about town here at the National Cowboy Hall of Fame, as it was called when he first came aboard, and retired in February of 2017 after 18 after 38 years. Don actually and I had a conversation about my trying to carry his boots, and I cannot. So I'm willing to try to carry one, and I'm still stumbling to do that. And I'm trying not to screw up what he built here. But I'm going to ask you to give him a round of applause for everything he did. Because it was really Don Reeves who was the advocate to eventually create this partnership, this 25-year partnership with the National Cowboy Museum and the Traditional Cowboy Arts Association. And he saw and had the vision, a shared vision with the artists to bring them here in a natural partnership, because there's nothing in my way of thinking in terms of the contemporary realm that marries more closely with the mission of this institution than the Traditional Cowboy Arts Association, and we have him to thank for those 2.5 decades. So, I have questions.
Me too.
So they thought it was going to be a panel discussion. It's more going to be an interrogation.
It'll be a roast.
So I want all of y'all to answer this, okay, and in your own time. And if you go on and on, I'll cut you off, because Byron Price taught me how to use a hook from the stage. And Byron is with us in spirit, even though he is down in Norman. But he would be here if he could. Starting with Cary, how was and is the term traditional defined within the context of this group, in your view?
Boy, talk about a loaded question. Traditional, yeah, we tradition within the context of the TCAA, I think we'd have to say that a tradition that honors the history and the heritage of our Western culture. So that casts a fairly big net out there, I think. That makes things like a wine boat or a candlesticks and that sort of thing. I know Scott's probably going to bring up Tiffany's and the tradition of great craftsmanship, and that's the kind of tradition that we're trying to respect and honor and keep relevant and robust as we move forward. We're also, of course, in kind of have been and will continue to be in an ongoing debate as to what traditional methods do we then wind up with these artifacts as it were. So,
Good enough.
turn loose.
Dr. Hardy?
So for me, tradition means a lot of different things. Our family started ranching in 1860, so kind of been bathed in that. But if you think about the West, it was always about moving forward. So in my mind, tradition is about our disciplines, not the method. The horn saddle, using a poly rope instead of rawhide, on and on. Those are all innovations that came through the West because of progression. So in my trade, as long as I can feel it's still accomplished by hand, or the hand is involved, then it's just the tradition moving ahead. So it's always I have guys, one of the first years we were together, I had a guy approach me and he said, well, you guys aren't very traditional. And I looked at him and I said, so what year would you do that? And he said, well, Spanish colonial. I said, oh, cool. We didn't have much of that where I was from. So I don't know what I'm going to do. Anyway, to me, the West is always moving ahead, and that's part of the tradition.
Reverend Reeves?
Thought you were going to skip to Ernie for sure. I really love that question, and I just remember I had to suffer through listening to them argue about that for 2 hours just about 2 weeks ago on the phone. So it's something that people may think, well, they've got that all lined out. There's one sentence in their mission statement, and that's all there is. It's alive, and like Scott said, it's an organic type of a situation. Even the Californians talk about the classic California style. Well, when they had the gold rush, they had all kinds of Hispanic people and others and Europeans come into California, and they were guild craftsmen from Europe. They were highly trained silversmiths and stuff like that from farther down in South America and Central America. Chileans came up, and they really had an influence. They brought their skills up there because guess what? People had money to spend, and they were happy to let them spend money on highly decorated things and their special things, and each of them then advanced in that they brought floral carving to saddles, the United States, and a number of things like that. So it's like Scott says, it's a movie. When are you gonna? Where's that line? The TCAA guys, do you want to? Well, they're engraving and stuff. Well, that's not traditional. If you use this or use that, well, you're going to go back to 1870s, 1880s down in Texas, where they'd take a graver and walk it across the silver overlay. You know, they call it rocker. You know, you have that Z or zigzag. Well, you want them to keep doing that just so they could call it traditional? No, you don't. You know, it's so innovation has been a hallmark all the way through the West of all these different generations. You look back in saddlery, silversmithing, and I spent a long time through the years being able to sit at the knee of Luis Ortega and listen to him talk and collect stories. And there was a time when he was really getting beat up, and people said, "Why are you doing this? This you're braiding this got all this color junk in it. It looks jicky and all this kind of stuff. It's not right, and then, in a few years, Luis Ortega was known for his beautiful braiding, and his presentation reins are given away to the best riders. And so change and something new, something different is always hard for some people to accept. But it's that innovation that I think that these guys, innovation and creativity, are really close to what these guys are setting now as the new traditions. I really think they brought about a renaissance of the 4 trades that they represent to this day.
Colonel Marsh.
Yeah, what he was referring to is actually a wiggle line, and I still use that.
You're forgiven.
Old farts.
Yeah, look at if you look real close, you'll find some in the gallery for sure. We don't use it as profusely as maybe as largely as it used to be, but my idea of the traditional, I think it's different for everybody, but I honestly think it's just like a working cowboy or a carpenter or a logger or a fisherman or whatever you do for a living. You just want to get up and be proud of your day's work and do the very best you can, and that's tradition for me. You don't want to have anything to do with when things aren't being done right. If you're working on a ranch and everything's total chaos all the time, you'll probably quit and go get you another job. I don't think tradition is limiting yourself to different tools either. I think I think we should be open to 50 years ago we started using electrical welders. 40 years ago we started using pneumatic gravers. Some of us did, if we could afford them. But I still got hammers and chisels. I use it all, but if I can reach out and grab some little tidbit thing that's going to help me every day for the rest of my life, make a better living, then I'm going to probably get it. I know a lot of guys are capable now of designing things on computers. Hell, good for them. I'm not that talented, but if I was, I'd be doing it probably. I just never got around any computers till I was in my 50s. So that's about my thoughts on it.
So I'm gonna ask you to dig a little deeper. I worked for a number of years in a historical museum, and that was the name of it. And I got to thinking about the difference between historical and historic. What was the difference? So I want you to think about the difference between tradition and traditional. And in terms of that definition of historic and historical means it's about history. Historic means it's part of history. So think about that, how if you'd like to amend anything you said or you'd like to add to anything you said about that difference between tradition and traditional.
Well, I also think that we build on what we learn. I mean, if a student comes to me now, they get to start from where I'm at as far as knowledge goes and proceed from there. The guys I learned from, Al Tejan, Elmer Miller, some of those other guys that helped me out, they started in the 40s. They went to San Francisco and worked for Rafael Gutierrez, sweeping his floor. I don't know if he showed him anything, but I know they got a chance to sweep the floor. But so, I'm really proud of being just a couple generations removed from a guy that started making bits in the 1890s, I've been quite privileged to do that, and I used to get all my inspiration from talking to those guys, and getting their historical perspective has always been very important for me. But his work was pretty nice, and then their work was better. It got better, and I hope that mine's gotten. Function is always the name of the game. I think the bits were functional. Obviously, they started out. All those guys made very functional pieces, so that's the most important part. But as far as the aesthetics go, I think every generation can maybe take it one step further because they have the foundation at a higher plane.
So what I see there is it's in every aspect of the West. And what we do is traditional. Take genetics in cattle. It's always changing. Same with horse breed. And our work's the same way. And what we're creating today is traditional 20 years from today. So again, it goes back to me, it's traditional in the West to do the best job you can do and progress. Because they didn't come out here with wagons, stay living in wagons. So I don't think in my profession I should be trying to recreate something that was created 100 years ago that I can do better now because of certain technologies. Light is one of them. You look at a craftsman from 100 years ago, and there was some, I mean, they're digging up pieces in Europe that were found from 1700 years ago that are incredible. But those guys didn't work at night. I spent a lot of hours in my shop at night. So I'm glad they invented the light.
One word is a verb and one's or I should say a adjective and one is a noun, so tradition, traditional. But thought occurred to me 26 years ago when we first arrived on the scene here at this facility. It was called what? And I just heard it earlier this week. The Cowboy Hall of Fame. So why was that the moniker in those days? And you look around the room and you can see this is a nod to those who have gone before us, and I think that's what we owe our heritage in a traditional sense is to we are all standing on someone's shoulders here in one way or another. So, and I think whatever you do in life, if you spend enough time in that tradition, that genre, that vocation, that discipline, you wind up starting to really appreciate whose shoulders you are standing on, and that's also a traditional thing with Western heritage. I think we respect. One of the things that thinking about not long ago, years ago, 40 years ago, as a part of a arena crew for junior rodeos and that sort of thing, and I never did rodeo when I was growing up. That was not something my family did, but when those kids came into the arena, they were required to have a cowboy hat on. And so you ask the question, why is that? It's out of respect for tradition. And I think that's one of the valuable things that we have within our culture is that respect for those things that have gone before. But as Scott says, we have to measure that against how are we going to move forward? There has to be a path forward in order to remain relevant and robust.
Thank you. Don?
I think a couple of things came to mind. One thing, just real quick, that with Cary talking about the hat, and it was actually PRCA, or before that was RCA rules. You had to get out of the gate with a hat on, a Western hat on, because they would say people came here to see cowboys. They didn't come to see farmers with ball caps on. And so I always thought that was kind of funny. But with the TCAA, one of the things that nod to traditional, there are a number of things that have been built, and probably some of the things in the gallery today, that'll never see the mouth of a horse or the back of a horse. But you can bet that those works are totally functional, very well engineered, and in the traditional basis that these guys know that it will work well in a horse's mouth, even if it never has that. That's part of their traditions, and I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. A lot of people could ornament the heck out of one of these pieces of equipment, but if it wasn't the right kind of equipment, that's just not gonna. You guys aren't gonna allow that. and good on you, as the Aussies say. In terms of historic and historical, the first thing that came to my mind was one of our good friends, Dale Harwood. And for the 10th anniversary exhibition that was in the hallway at the museum, that year Dale, his hands were starting to go, and he decided he was going to build a rig. Saddle, the reins, the bit, I believe, the whole damnly, didn't he? He built in his own shop, put it out there, and hung a price tag of $97,500, if I remember right. And 7 people stepped forward and said, "I want that for that price." It sold for that price, and Dale he talked about it, and one of the guys that put his name in for that asked Dale, says, "Well, what if it doesn't sell?" He says, "I'll look forward to having it at home." That was Dale, and that was the way these guys look at this thing. And some of them, you got to know through the years, that these guys have been proud to take some of their pieces home and be able to see them in their own shop, and they're fine with that. But that was historic when Dale did that, and when it sold, that was a benchmark. Not just an economic benchmark, but he left his stamp and walked away proud.
Thank you, Don. Ernie already addressed this, so I'm going to skip him on this one. But Scott and Cary, your particular tradition that you work in, can you tell us a little bit about that tradition, where it was prevalent, and among whom, and so on? Tell us a little bit more about your particular area that you work.
Well, silversmithing is as old as time and as old as decoration. And in the West, when a lot of people were coming from Europe, they brought a lot of that tradition with them in teapots or whatever they brought to give them the comforts at home. And that moved over into the horse gear. You can go back as far as, not North America, but Genghis Khan. All his generals rode with bejeweled bridles and saddles. It was a status symbol. So, and I think today it still is. If you look at, as guys do better, their rigs get better, they add more silver. If they're wise, they add lots of silver. It's a status symbol, and maybe status isn't the right word. It's they're proud, and they love their horses. They want their horses to look good. So nice bridle silver, nice saddle silver. Buckles, in the West, a buckle is who you are. Most guys don't wear jewelry, but they'll wear a buckle. And whether it's a rodeo or a ranch cowboy or whatever, the buckle talks of their personality. And that's came forward through time to tell who they are. When they started the ranch bronc ridings, when they got together for rodeers or gatherings, they would top off horses, and they wore big wide belts. And they started for their kidneys and their backs, and they started originally putting little plaques on the back to say who won what, And that migrated to the front, and over the years they've got big, they've got small. The first Calgary Stampede buckles, for example, for the winners in 1912, they were built by a jewelry company in Calgary, and they were 1 inch tall by 1.5 inches long. Just tiny. And that's what everybody wore back then. So it's, to me, our tradition, be it horse jewelry or on the person, it's a statement of the West and a statement of your place in the West.
Thank you. Cary?
Every month, I think Craig Rollman back there in the back, we were talking earlier, maybe this morning, I think, or yesterday, about how it seems like in the history of saddlery, every month that goes by, we're uncovering more and more deeper history, going back into the Asian continent and that sort of thing. So all of that, it's really fascinating to track all that stuff. But then if we, of course, fast forward to where we are today, and one of the things we did 26 years ago was try to, I guess you might say, reintroduce art into the cowboy trades. And as Scott said a moment ago, that's kind of been, you might say, the evolution of things. You go from utilitarian to, at some point, you start to incorporate more and more art. It becomes more of another dimension to the work. And I know I'm fascinated with some of the dialogue that we have out there with regard to what is the role of art within our cultures, regardless of what it is, Western culture or the writ large culture that we all bathe in every day. And art's a tremendous part of that. And has been said by many people a lot smarter than me that the arts wind up helping us interpret the world in a way that is coherent. And you think about that, that is certainly the case where we're trying to make sense of the world. Every person in this room, in some sense, as we move through life with our singular point of view, we're looking for coherence, aren't we? We're looking for a way to make sense of this chaos and absurdity of life. The arts play a role in that. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do as a group, is to bring an interpretation of the world and our culture to more and more people. And by elevating these things as objects d'art, that's one way we serve our neighbor, serve our culture, and love one another, to put it bluntly.
Can I tell a little story here?
Absolutely.
Cary and I knew each other before the TCAA and did a little work together, not much. But when we began with the TCAA, we've worked together every year for 25 years. And when we started, it was kind of the norm in saddle making and silversmithing is saddle maker would phone up at silversmith and say, I want 6 conchos and a horn cap. That was kind of the end of the deal. Well, we kind of started out that way, and then one year Cary came up to see Chuck Storms, and he stopped at our place and stayed overnight, and in the morning we'd talked most of the night about the saddle we were going to work on, and things got a little more exciting, and might have been anyway, it got more exciting, and in the morning...
I thought you were going to leave that part out.
In the morning, before he went to go see Chuck, and I was supposed to take my boys to a Peter Campbell clinic, and we went over to the shop for a quick minute, and we started talking, really getting into the design of the saddle and stuff like that. And for me, when I work with a saddle maker, it's my stuff is to augment their stuff. I'm not trying to take the spotlight. I'm not trying to do anything, but we started talking about design and getting deeper and deeper and deeper to the point where my wife phoned me and said, are you taking these kids to the class or what? So anyway, and that's the way that's intensified with Cary and I over those 27 years. And I like to think that maybe we changed a little bit how saddle makers and silversmiths work together. And it's more of a collaborative, which again is the West, right? It's about collaboration. It's about working together and moving ahead.
That night you guys stayed up drinking, was that the night you created that 7-string saddle?
Yes. Still for sale.
So let's move on to the second word in the name of your organization, which is cowboy. Each of you, if you'll give your responses, how do you define cowboy geographically, ethnically, temporally, vocationally? How do you define a cowboy?
Boy, nowadays, those cowboys are on Yellowstone, right? And what's a real cowboy? You walk through an airport with a hat on, and people ask, "Are you a real cowboy? You must be from Texas," and all of that kind of stuff. But nowadays, of course, it's expanded. The meaning of that has expanded significantly. I know. Back many years ago, there was a folklorist from the state of Idaho who was surveying a lot of craftsmen, saddle makers in particular, and she asked a very relevant question. She's, so what's your clientele? How's the breakdown on that? And I couldn't answer because you think of, when you say cowboy, I would say, you know, to be fair, that's a working cowboy, not to be confused with, say, a rancher who may be horseback part of the time, but he's also a ranch owner and in a managerial position and so on. So, and I went back to my books, and it's probably not changed a whole lot since then, but working cowboys were actually at that time only about a 16% of my total business. 50% of my work went to agriculture. The rest of the 50% was a mixture of your pleasure riders, outfitters, packers, and that sort of thing. But the culture at large is probably going to interpret all of them are cowboys in some form or fashion. And there was an English professor from University of Montana. I can't quote what he said right now verbatim, but he talked about the cowboy in the real sense of the word was somebody who had this, you know, rugged individualism, free spirit, all of those kind of things that are actually very closely connected to an American ideal. And in 1983, I worked in Bozeman, Montana in the saddle shop, and the guy that I worked for was a real thoughtful guy. And one day we were chirping back and forth, and he said, every person in the United States has a latent desire to be a cowboy. And, oh, come on, you know, not everybody wants to be. No, he says, think about it. It's not a strict definition of a man horseback. But when you think about freedom, your own man in a sense, not to be gender specific there, but someone who has autonomy, agency, self-direction, all of those kind of things. Everybody in this room is a cowboy. That's it.
Why do you always let him answer first?
Yeah, what are we supposed to say now?
Exactly. So I've made a living out of a saddle, and I've worked a lot of cows, but I am nowhere close to a cowboy in my mind. And I think that's something that I would never call myself, but that's up to other people to call you. I know a lot of good cows, and they make me proud. And from my past and from my heritage, that's why I wear a hat, and that's why I'm proud to wear a hat, because it signifies that culture more than the cowboy, to be honest with you, in my mind. And people get upset with Yellowstone and everything else, but that's Hollywood, man. But look what it's done for us, and people love it. And they're, there might be 100 people come to us because of that, but if one good one sticks in there, I'm okay with that. And I've heard this crap all my life about born into it and everything, and I've known a lot of guys that turned into really good horsemen, really good cowmen, that didn't start till they were in their 20s or 30s. And it's so to me, a cowboy comes from your heart, not from your heritage.
Working down the line, I guess I'm next, but that is a good question that I think a lot of people accept that they already have the definition in their head. But working on the American Cowboy Gallery over there, that little 8,000 square foot room, we needed a solid definition, and the one that we came up with was a person. I won't trap myself like that, but a person who works cattle on horseback with a rope. And that pretty well covers a lot of generations and everything, and also carries a nod to a skill set, like Scott says. You dang well better be a horseman, or you won't stay up there very long. And if you're going to be able to work with cattle, you better be able to handle a rope. And that what you ended up with was in during times, there were people say, well, the cowboys they would come to town and they'd be very haughty and everything. They're very proud that they worked up there, you know, another 5 feet higher in the air than somebody working on ground, and they thought that was their status. But some of that goes back to Europe, to where the horsemen were the people who had the resources to own horses, and they were either the nobility or they were a class of people that could own good horses and knew how to ride them. So that you can see that traces through. The Spanish were very particular about that, but so that in terms of the vaquero, vaca being cow, someone who works with cattle. But I remember one of the funniest things I ever had this discussion with early on in my career here. I think it was around 1980. I was privileged to call a lady and tell her she was widowed, unfortunately, that her husband had been selected as an honoree. He was being inducted into the Hall of Fame, the National Cowboy and Hall of Fame. And she got real huffy. I said, ma'am? And she said, my husband was not, never was a cowboy. He was a cattleman. I said, yes, ma'am. And from then on, I very quickly understood the difference of some people, and the ranchers or whatever. She said, my husband hired cowboys. They were the workers. And in time, I got to enjoy the nuance of, but by knowing people like Watt Matthews and some other very esteemed ranchers, that they highly value the skills of their cowboys, and they did not look down on them as mere workers. Watt Matthews is one of those. All 5'6" of him. I thought he was one of the most admirable ranchers I'd ever met. But yeah, it's a skill set, and it's again a time and place. And but I think a lot of that, even to today, it's not just regional, but it has to do with the fact that you're not anything to say against truckers, but you're not a trucker. You're with the right clothes on. You're a working hand, as they say in some places. You can where you go on to a ranch and they can be assured that you can pull your weight.
I don't know how to follow these guys, but I mean, you think about it, I don't know if it's that easy to define or what. They've been all over the place, and they're all right, but I think most of the best cowboys I ever met in my life probably wouldn't brag on the fact that that's, you know, that people admired them and stuff. I just think that I think the cowboy will be fine as long as young people, girls, boys, whatever, aspire to be cowboys. I think we'll be fine.
As long as we keep a beef industry.
I think it was Baxter Black that said you can never see a real cowboy from the blacktop. And Red Stegall has echoed those sentiments, and he'll be your course.
Get off the highway.
Yep. We're going to shift to talking about how this partnership developed between the museum and the Traditional Cowboy Arts Association. I'm going to start with Don because he was as representative of the museum side, but if you three other artists would talk about how you saw that develop over these 25 years.
My eyesight's not real good, but I can't see Chuck Storms sitting out there right now, but I bet he's hiding in the crowd somewhere. But I remember a phone call. I'd been talking to Chuck about working back and forth and getting some images for him because he was working on an exhibit presentation on Luis Ortega's rawhide work, some of his best work. And he called up and he said, well, I'm actually getting ready to get in the car and head down to, I think, Cary, which one of the meetings was that? That was the Hayden Lake meeting that Cary, well, yeah, his co-pilot was Scott. And he said, Scott and I are heading down there. And it was interesting because Chuck says, well, we're going to be meeting with these other craftsmen. We're thinking about getting the craftsmen together and forming Craftsman group, and I don't know what he ever said really at that point showing together, but just kind of like the Cowboy Artists of America. And he says, I don't know whether this is really going to work, but Scott and I are interested in it, and we're going to go check it out. And he sounded like he was about 55% in at that conversation, and that was on the way over to the meeting. And then it was fun to talk to him after he got back, and he was all, you guys were all excited about the opportunity and maybe what you could see as the possibilities. And so it grew well, but based off the vision of Mike Beaver and Cary and Scott and Chuck and soon Dale Harwood was in that crowd, and so Ernie jumped in shortly thereafter, and so they knew what would happen. They came back to me and started listing off the different trades and things, and came to be a real good friend of mine. These guys knew Don Bellamy from living he was a banker at that point up in Salmon, Idaho. But Don said we needed to get organized. He was a financier, and we need to get these guys, all boys of course, organized, and they're going to get together in the fall and have a meeting and a show of some sort. But in the spring, every spring they're going to get together, and they'd all needed to be there, and they're going to have a business meeting. They're going to plan what the next year's activities are. I said, full. You're going to get these saddle makers and bit and spur makers and whatever, and you're going to make them come together at this community or that community and sit around a conference table and have a paper a meeting, and with minutes and all that kind of stuff. I said, I wouldn't wager any money on that. I got to wait and see if that can happen. And by God, they've been doing it every year since. And I think y'all ought to give them credit for that, because they have been extremely intentional. They have dotted every I, crossed every T. And it's doesn't come natural for a lot of these guys to do that. And I've been very, very proud of them for it.
Here. Jump on in there.
Well, for me, I got a call from Cary and then Mike Beaver about the possibility of forming a group, and it was kind of fortuitous because I had Cowboys and Indians was a pretty new magazine back then, and so that was in 1998, and they had done a feature article on 3 silver companies, and I'm not going to mention their names, but they were all production companies. I knew them all, and they all claimed that work was done by hand. I could say something to that, but and it was of the highest quality. And at that point, I'd been a full-time silversmith for 17 years, and I'd had the pleasure of working with Mark Drain and Al Pachetti, who I just held them both as, well, Al Pachetti to me was, not trying to be rude, but he was the god of the silver world. I mean, just an incredible man. And it was really insulting. And I'd worked really hard to get where I was, and to see all these guys through mass production and the advertising dollar making people like that look like, they were secondary. There's no other way to say it, but it pissed me off. And when Cary called, Chuck and I talked for quite a while, and it was funny, the ride down, we talked quite a bit, and said, if this is going to be a promotional outfit, don't need that. We're doing fine, We got down there and went in that room, met everybody, walked in the room, sat down and started talking about what was going on in the industry. You have to understand, all these guys were doing well in their own careers at that point. They didn't need to step out. But as we talked through the day, it just became more apparent that we were losing and something had to be done. And to have guys like, anybody in that room, Dale Harwood, guys that have been in it, they were absolute legends in the industry, deciding that they would share their knowledge opened themselves up to that was incredible, you know, and it hadn't been heard of. At that point, it was all about secrecy in the trades. So that's what brought us together. Everybody was concerned with the next generation, with the way quality was slipping in the trades and accepted to be slipping. I mean, everybody was fine with it, except the guys that were true craftsmen. So that's where I came in.
Ernie, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can jump in. I was really honored to be approached to be a founding member. I was the young guy in the bunch then. It don't look like it now, I'm sure, but to get to deal with those guys. But no, I wasn't all in right away. I met Scott and Chuck and everybody. I'd met Chuck before. I knew Cary. I knew Mike. I'd met Dale. I didn't meet Scott till we were at that meeting. I'd heard of him. He had a huge reputation. We were all aware of each other, but, you know, we didn't really have the internet back then. It didn't work then like it does now for selling stuff. So in those times, you know, I was just so excited to get together with these guys and put on an amazing exhibit. It wasn't necessarily about, I thought it might take years to actually develop a sale, but just the thought of having a room with all of their work in it and me being able to be in there too was just real appealing. But back then, what you need to remember is, you know, we didn't have the internet, and a one-man shop can't afford to advertise much. So you would make stuff for a couple of months or two, and then go to a show, take a vacation you couldn't not afford, just to see if you could get some of that money that you thought you were earning, you know, and that's the way we made a living, right? And the most horrible, disappointing parts were the shows at that time. You would send them pictures, and you would get accepted into a show. It might be all the way across the country, and boy, I sent them my best pictures, and we, you know, go all the way there, and we're just so excited. And damn, after you've been, what you call that? When you get into the show, screened, you get juried into the show, and you show up there, and there's rock and roll T-shirts on this side and crocheted beer can hats on this side, and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm here, you know. So the thought of being able to have a show with these guys that was the biggest thing for me right there.
Cary?
So we're often, as a group, we go back to the why, and oftentimes we open a meeting, and this meeting this week was no exception. What's right at the top of the list is our mission statement, and so which developed fairly quickly. But even before we had a mission statement established, we would look at the museum's mission statement, and it was crystal clear that we were in harmony. There was compatibility that was undeniable, and so it just seemed like a very, very logical fit. And within, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, we kind of I think our mission statement's been refined once or twice since then, but you look at the reasons why this institution exists and why we exist as a group, and the mandates are almost indistinguishable.
So along those lines, this institution has always been committed to contemporary Western art making, from its initial partnership in 1966 with the Cowboy Artists of America, which was brand new then, newly formed. And similarly, in '99, the same thing happened again with this partnership. So Don, it was your pitch to take to the museum. Can you speak to the expectations of the institutions for another partnership similar to what had started 33 years before then?
Oh, you changed that question right at the end.
Threw him a curve.
No, I remember as soon as they basically came back and Chuck and I were talking, I said, okay, what did you decide about whether you're all going to get together or not? And I said, you realize that if you guys are looking at all to have an exhibition as an association, the National Cowboy Western, well, at that point, Hall of Fame, is very willing to be the host. And the next week, I took that request to the curatorial board and said, "This is what I promised." But I said, "This is an absolute fit," and very proud of you guys for taking the step, because it was. At that point, I'd watched for years and years the Cowboy Artists of America, and I apologize to anybody in the group, but I watched them argue amongst themselves year after year of what their direction was and what they need to be doing and things like that. So it's not easy to keep a group like that together. But anyway, we laid it out there, and I got permission all along that our institution was willing and very interested in being the host. And then we had that meeting in Elko. We knew you all were going to be there, and eating is very close to our hearts as a group, and we were all at Denny's for 2 days. They ran out of coffee, and but anyway, Ken Townsend, another person who very close to my heart, and he was a person that really influenced me in terms of how to deal with other people with respect. And anyway, Ed and I went up there, and Ken went through the first day of the meeting. He said, all right, enough. We're in. and he was in 100%. And then it got around to being serious about having the show at the museum in less than 12 months. And at that point, I started to honestly consider, what in the world was I thinking? I must be insane, because that was the year that we were opening the new Western exhibits over there, and I had 8,000 square foot gallery I was trying to finish at the same time, trying to get this first exhibit together. My wife almost left me in terms of she'd see me about once a week, it seemed like, but it all came together. I had that spring meeting and said, okay, we're going to do it. And Bobby Weaver, another person who, Bobby was a getter-doner from Texas, from Midland, Plano area.
No trees.
No trees. And okay, we got this. We're going to do it. Okay, let's get her done. And you wouldn't have that wing over there, and it wouldn't have been done, and definitely in the time it was, if it wasn't for, at that point, Dr. Weaver, PhD historian, but his background was ranch country, and if things started to slow down, he put on a hard hat, and he was over there, and he was right in the middle of them, giving them all, and he made sure that got completed. And Bobby listened to, let's see, who made it down? It was Chuck Storms, Bellamy, and then me and Bobby Weaver, he was assistant director at that time. And Bobby said, okay, let's do this. We just need to do this. And I said, what about a budget? We'll find a budget. We'll find the money to get it done. And you're going to open it this fall. And that was, but I said, oh my gosh, 99, we did it that fall. Heck of a party. It was the same time that we were celebrating the opening of that new 30,000 square foot wing, courtesy of the Gaylord family and others. And it was quite a party. And I remember going from table to table, talking to the guys, and then later talking to them in their gallery and saying, "Well, this kind of party you were thinking about just a few months ago." It was really neat. It was a very exciting time.
Ernie already touched on this in terms of expectations for those initial get-togethers and spoke about it being an exhibition first. So an art exhibition that you might sell something at, but mainly an art exhibition. Would you guys like to talk about those expectations?
Real quick, let me throw that out one time very clearly, is that one of the promises that was made as a host institution said you can go to a booth show, you can go down to Arizona and you can sell your stuff on a table next to somebody making hats out of beer cans and things like that. But what we're going to do is we're going to present your work as art as best we can. It'll be exhibited. It'll be lit as well as we can. We'll put it on a pedestal, make it look special, let people know it is special. And then the other part of it is you guys come, you do your best work. The museum's responsibility is to tell as many people that love this kind of thing and appreciate this level of work. We're going to tell them and see if we can bring them to town that one day a year. And that's the way it started out, and that's the way it's grown. That's been the partnership. You know, you guys do your best work, and we bring all kinds of people who really love your best work.
So, for me, I mean, when we, again at Hayden Lake, when we talked about this, it was Mike Beaver that said this work needs to be shown as art. And it was Dale Harwood that said, the guys in the group and the guys coming into the group, every cut they make has to be their best cut, just naturally. And when we talked about a place to show, to do an exhibit, whatever, it was the whole idea in that, as was the group, was to educate people, both collectors and the public. And we wanted to show people where this work could go, out of the norm. You know, the best saddles, the best bits, whatever. So the mantra for the show that when we sealed the deal with the museum was, as Don said, bring your best works. But it was really push yourself past where you are now and bring that. And it's from somebody who's been at every show. I mean, it's really exciting for young craftsmen, you know, the very first year, bring the best piece you can bring. So you do that. And then year 2 comes and they say, bring the best piece you can bring. And it's like,
Bring a better piece.
I thought I did that last year. So the education part of it, this is just kind of outside the question, but what that's done, I have all 25 catalogs now, but 24 catalogs at home, and if you go through those catalogs and you watch the craftsmen that were there then, the ones that came in and their works now, you see a drastic change in craftsmanship in each participating member. And years ago, Don said to me, guys like Ortega or, you know, not taking anything away from them, but they would come up with a style and they would stay with that style and they'd perfect that style through their careers. But because we push ourselves like this every year, your style is always elevating, rotating, moving, whatever you have to do to change to make it work. So to me, this is still our best educational tool. That's what we went into it as. Of course, selling's a damn nice benefit. But, Cary.
Early on, I guess, while we're telling stories of the good old days back in the very beginning show, of course, it was linked to a gala event that was celebrating the opening of this new wing over here, and here, you know, this Idaho farm boy turned / sort of cowboy and stuff, and had never seen so many fancy dressed people in my life, and this Sam Noble Event Center was just chock full. I mean, it was full of people, and of course there was been a lot made about the very first conversation I had with Mike Beaver in Elko about the concept that would become the TCAA, and and the Oklahoma City Philharmonic was playing, I think, that night, and it was just a spine-tingling electricity that was in the whole event. And I got up out of my table and before the meal started and went over to Mike and I said, "Is this what you had in mind?" And he's just like me, just gobsmacked, and wow, we've just kind of built it out one brick every year at a time since then.
Well, we need to turn this into the crowd, but do any of you have anything you'd like to say before we wrap it up? Ernie?
I was just thinking that another reason why we formed this group was the educational process. All of us, I think, had people that we were trying to help. But as a independent lone wolf guy in your own cave somewhere in the middle of nowhere, you don't have resources to be able to assist students to come and see you. I mean, you're just working as hard as you can, just trying to make a living. And we all had efforts to help people, but as we pooled together, we were able to develop a resource that we could all draw from. And that's been one of the most amazing things to me, is just all the students that we've been able to help over the years, that without my association with this group, I never would have been able to do that. And the museum also, I mean, they pry me out of my shell. I'm horrible with this thing. But they have me doing classes over here, and I gotta say, I've probably hit the wall now, but I've grown quite a bit personally from where I started.
I got to say, just before Don, about the museum, and I remember when Chuck and Don Bellamy came back and they were getting a hold of everybody and saying, we got this wired, you got to have your stuff ready, such and such a date, which I didn't appreciate that. But the whole thing that I think everybody needs to remember and think about is there was never a contract, ever. Right? How's that?
Handshake.
That's it.
Yeah, if somebody casts a stone and says these guys aren't traditional, coming up alongside them, like I said, listening to Luis Ortega, and him telling me stories, and these guys, the breeders in the group, Nate and Leland and others who are familiar with, and definitely Mike Beaver was familiar with the breeding of Luis Ortega. But Ortega would tell me stories about when he was, I think it was 11 years old, and his dad was a manager of a ranch in California. And there was this old man that would come once a year around to cook and to repair equipment and stuff like that. His name was Fernando Labrado. Fernando was taught how to braid working reins, beautiful reins, Anez reins is the most delicate. California reins, kind of the worst traditional. But anyway, back in the 1830s at a mission in Southern California, or maybe closer to Central California, but 1830s, and I can't remember the tribe he was from, but they generally call it, his family had been helping the Catholic missions. They called them mission Indians. They were the Caros for the missions. And then he would go on to be fairly well known for his work, and taught many others. But Luis, at that early age, 11 or so, he told Fernando he wanted to learn how to do that because he knew that to be accepted as a working hand at this California ranches, you showed up and on your horse, and the reins you were using, the rieta that you had, the 60-foot rieta, those were all made by the rider. And if they were of quality enough, the work work that writer produced, that ranch would hire them to work on their ranch. That's a pretty tough line, you know, if you wanted to be a hand or if you wanted to be a cowboy. At that point, if you want to be a vaquero or a buckaroo. Anyway, so Lewis says, I want to learn. I want you to teach me. So he started teaching him the basics of what hides to have, what hides are good enough, what you treated them with, how you cut them. Lewis remembers he made his first hackamore, and he said he was so proud of this hackamore that would go over instead of a bridle at the nose of the horse. He gave it to Fernando. Fernando took it, looked at the braiding, grunted, and threw it across the room. And he said he was devastated. He said he just walked out or whatever, and he was devastated. And Fernando says, if you don't want to try any harder than this, don't come back to me. I mean, tough love, you know. And that's the way he treated him for about 6 months. Threw it across the room, time and time again. And he kept going back. He kept getting better. There you have two people that learned that traditional trade from 1830. Luis Ortega died in 1995, I'm sorry.
Excuse me.
That tradition went through, along those lines, through two people, through all those decades. That's what this group is doing.
I'd just like to echo Ernie's thoughts there about education, and I always bring up the metaphor of you're riding down this trail, and you're leading other riders behind you, and you whack your head on a limb, and you turn around and you say, friend, do what you want to do, but there's a limb right there. And I personally believe there's a moral obligation that we have to one another as human beings to turn around and say, friend, I'm just telling you that there's here, you don't have to hit your head on the same limb I did. And I think that's a look back at tradition and where we are in the context currently, where are we going from here? And I think that's what the TCAA has in large part been about.
So I'm going to conclude this way. I taught art history and Western studies for 18 years at a university in West Texas. And I always told my students that great works of art should be uplifting, morally, spiritually, ethically, and especially aesthetically. But also impressed upon them that art takes time. It's not a cell phone snap picture. That artworks require your time. You need to bring something to it. And these artists put their hearts and souls into each work of art, and so they deserve your time as you stand and look at their great works of art. And I will guarantee you will be better people for the time you spend with these works of art in our gallery. So much obliged for coming.